Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of UPSC Civil Service Examination. In the first article, we'll talk about the role of India in evolving multipolar world order. In the second article, we'll talk about Panchayat Extension to Schedule Areas Act. Then in the third article, we'll talk about the importance of critical minerals and the way forward. In the fourth article, we'll talk about the very important Coffee Board of India. In the fifth article, we'll talk about one of the very important security agencies, that is the Intelligence Bureau. Finally, in the prelims snippet section, we'll have a look at some of the very important articles for the prelims examination. Now, the very first article deals with India and the multipolar world. So after the formation of the new government, the Foreign Ministry has set a target to make India as a leading power. So we'll see what multipolar world is all about and what is the role of India in this evolving multipolar world. Now, this is with respect to GS2, India and its neighborhood relations, bilateral, regional and global groupings. Now, first, let's talk about what is a multipolar world order. See, multipolar world is characterized by a sort of distribution of power among different countries, among several countries, and the absence of a dominant power, right? So if you have got power distributed among different countries and if you have the absence of a sort of a superpower, that is known as a multipolar world. Now, this can be seen in the emergence of different economic powers, for example, India or China, or it can be seen in the sort of emergence of different military powers around the world, or it can be even seen in the sort of evolution of or the emergence of soft power of different countries. For example, you must be familiar with the Korean pop culture or the Indian Bollywood. So that is what we mean by the multipolar world. Now, let's talk about the evolution of this multipolar world order. See, after the Second World War, what happened was that there was a sort of a development of a bipolar global construct, which was led by the United States of America and the erstwhile USSR. Right. So what happened was during this phase that there were mutual confrontation and different countries aligned to these two individual power blocks for their own strategic advantages. Right. What we saw in the year 1991 was the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, we saw the emergence of a unipolar world order, which was led by the United States of America. Now, this period witnessed different events. For example, we saw the intervention by the US in Iraq and Afghanistan. We saw the expansion of the United Nations Security Council's ambit. We saw the expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We saw that the US dominated the US dollar as a global reserve currency, right? So these were some of the manifestations of a sort of a unipolar world order, right? But slowly, what we saw that this whole construct of a unipolar world order, it started to sort of witness the degradation. It started to weaken down, right? So there was a challenge to the US hegemony, that is the US dominance, especially from the early 2000s. The first was the 2008 global financial crisis, which was primarily a result of the collapse of the US housing market. Now, this was something which actually induced great recession around the world. Almost every country on the planet was affected by this, and you had so many high rates of unemployment. Then this period also saw the rise of China, right? So there was a phenomenal economic rise of China, and one thing must be kept in mind, that this economic rise of China, it was followed by the rise of its assertiveness in its foreign policy, right? Especially in the context of Asia Pacific. And to this day, the Chinese foreign policy challenges the US when it comes to the Asia Pacific construct, right? What the surprise is that it was the US which actually encouraged China to join the WTO in the year 2001. Right. So that is something you must keep in mind. Next is the rise of emerging economies. See, with the rise of China, we also saw the rise of some of the other economies, for example, India, for example, Brazil. Now, this actually challenged the dominance of the sort of US economy. Next is the rise of Asian tigers. So what we witnessed was the four countries, that is Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea and Singapore. Now from 1950s onward, they were sort of having very good economic rates and they were sort of having a very good economic structure. But what we saw, especially after the 2000, was their sort of rapid progress when it comes to the technological domain, when it comes to the banking industry, when it comes to the semiconductors, right? Also, what we saw, the emergence of ASEAN. Now ASEAN as a regional grouping has been one of the most successful regional groupings, and it has witnessed substantial trade and investment, and that has led to the sort of increase in the standard of living among all these countries of ASEAN, right? Next is the formation of BRICS, right? So it was in the year 2009 that we saw the formation of BRICS, right? Now can you just tell me that which was the summit where the BRIC was initially formed? BRIC. When was, as I said, it was in 2009 when we had the first summit of the BRIC. Can you just tell me the place where this summit was organized? Now, let's see who answers first in the comment section. So BRICS, actually, it tried to sort of restructure the global economic order, right? And to this day, it challenges the sort of construct of the G7 led by the developed countries. Now, what are the trends which show that you have a sort of a multipolar world order? The first is the military spending. See, we all agree that still US is the most dominant or the largest military spender in the world. So according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's data of 2023, what we see that US actually spent $916 billion in the military. Now this was almost about 37% of the global spending on the military. Then on the second position, we have got $296 billion by China. So China came at second position with $296 billion in military spending. Then we have got India at fourth position with $84 billion, right? So that is, you need to remember, India is at fourth position. So what we see is that initially it was only the US who was in sort of spending a huge chunk of money in the military, right? But slowly we have seen that there are other countries as well. We have got Saudi Arabia, we have got Russia, we have got India, we have got China, who are investing or sort of spending a lot of amount in the military. Next is the global trade. See, according to the World Bank, it says that more and more the share of the US sort of trade in the world, in the global trade, has been declining, and the share of emerging economies has been increasing, right? So what we see is that more and more countries, developing countries, they are trading with each other, they are trading with developed countries, and this has given rise to a notion that the rate of the growth of the trade of the developed countries is sort of lower than the rate of the trade among the developing countries, right? Next is the foreign direct investments. So according to the World Investment Report, it says that China has been slowly replacing, it has not still replaced, but it is in the process of replacing US as one of the most biggest suppliers of foreign investments around the world. And what needs to be kept in mind, that most of these investments made by China, they are of strategic nature. By strategic nature, I mean to say that China has been investing a lot in South American countries. It has been spending a lot in African countries, primarily to secure its sort of resources, for example, critical minerals, right? So that is what you have to keep in mind. Now, can you just tell me that who publishes the World Investment Report? Let's see who posts the answer in the comment section. Now, what are the implications of a multipolar world, right? The first is diversification of the trade. As I have already told you, that according to the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, the sort of developing countries are trading more and more among each other, and this has led to a sort of a notion of multipolar trade network, right? So it is evolving, it is leading to the development of multipolar trade network. So what we see is that these developed countries, they are being slowly replaced in the quantum of the global trade which is happening, right? Next is significant investment patterns. I've already discussed that we have got the reports such as World Investment Report, which is categorically saying that the China is slowly sort of replacing the US as the world's largest investor. And what we need to keep in mind, that China is investing in almost all the countries in the world. One more point which I would like to mention here is the concept of sort of debt. So the debt trap diplomacy. So it is important. It is not related to this concept per se, but it is important when it comes to the international relations. So what China is doing is China is sort of investing heavily in different countries. For example, China has invested heavily in Sri Lanka when it comes to Hambantota port. Now, the capacity, the economic or the financial capacity of these small countries is not much. So they are unable to pay their debt back. So that is what leading to a debt trap diplomacy, right? So just keep in mind. Next is the power shift. Now, see, what happens is that with the sort of evolving multipolar world order, there has been a power shift from the Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. Right. So what we see is that the power has been shifting from the North America and the European region to the Eurasian landmass. Now this automatically says, it tells us that there is the evolution of the multipolarity in the world. Next is the competition for resources. Please understand, as the economic resources, as the economic potential or the economic capacity of different countries rises, it automatically leads to competition for resources. For example, oil and minerals. That is the reason that what we witness is that more and more countries are sort of having strategic partnerships with each other. Take the case of India. India is having strategic partnerships with different countries, for example, United Arab Emirates, UAE, right? So that it can have secured supplies of oil or natural gas, right? Next is the increased multipolar cooperation. See, we have got some of the very sort of domains, for example, climate change, for example, pandemic, for example, migration, global migration, where you need the cooperation of different countries. And this evolving multipolar world order, it has led to a sort of a situation where more and more number of countries are coming together and they are collaborating, right? Next is new global platforms. See, we already have got established platforms like United Nations Security Council or the World Trade Organization or other organizations. But what we see is that there has been an evolution of other platforms. For example, let's see World Economic Forum. Right. So we see the participation of different countries, different multinational corporations. We see the participation of different international non-governmental organizations on these platforms. Then we have got the Munich Security Conference, where the issues with respect to the security, the global security are discussed. Then a very sort of important and Indian initiative is the Raisina Dialogue. So we have got the Raisina Dialogue, where you see the participation of different countries, and we have got deliberations on the security issues and other issues as well. So what we see is that definitely multipolar world order is having implications in different dimensions. Now, coming to the challenges, what we see is the challenges with respect to the multipolar world order, that is the shifting of this power landscape. The first is the absence of unifying force. Please understand that when we had the US, we had a unipolar world. So it was the US who was dictating the terms, and it was the US who was maintaining the global peace and stability. But right now that is not the case. So what we see is that the global peace and stability, it requires collective actions. It requires actions from multiple parties, from multiple countries, right? So that is what you need to keep in mind. And therefore, naturally, the collective actions or collaborations among different countries becomes natural or important. Then there is increased risk of conflict. As I've said, that we have got sort of regional rivalries. We have got ethnic conflicts. We have got political instability. So that is what is leading to sort of risk of conflict. Take the case of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, or the Israel-Palestine conflict, or the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So we are witnessing increased number of conflicts, or the conflicts when it comes to the ethnic strifes in Africa, right? Now, then is the reaching consensus. As we are having more number of countries, as there is evolution of multipolar world, the consensus or the common ground, developing a common ground or developing a consensus is becoming more and more difficult. Now that can be easily seen in the negotiations we are having on the climate change, or we are having, let's say, in agriculture, in the WTO. Next is the erosion of international law. Many countries have been seen that they are openly flouting or violating the international law. Take the case of China in the South China Sea. So we have got United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, right? So UNCLOS, right? So China has been clearly violating the UNCLOS, that is United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, regulations when it comes to maintaining peace and maintaining freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, right? Next is internal instability. There have been many countries which are suffering from political instability or which are suffering from ethnic conflicts. Take the case of Myanmar. Now, this is actually affecting the whole region, right? Next is rise of populism and nationalism. What we are witnessing is that there has been an inward looking approach. Countries are more and more number of countries, they are looking inward, and that has led to a sort of a lowering of the international cooperation when it comes to different domains. Take the case of Chinese nationalism, right? So these are the challenges with respect to the power landscape, shifting power landscape. Now, India as the emerging key player in this transition from a unipolar world order to a sort of let's say the multipolar world order. How is India a key player? How we can say that India is one of the most important player when it comes to this evolution of the multipolar world order? Why India matters? First of all, India is an economic powerhouse. Now, according to the International Monetary Fund, what it says that as of now, India is the 5th largest economy when it comes to the nominal GDP. And it is the 3rd largest when it comes to the GDP on the purchasing power parity, right? And it is also saying that by 2030, India would cross, the GDP of India would cross $10 trillion, right? So this is a huge number, right? And this shows that India's economic projections are on the right trajectory and India is witnessing a very good economic growth. So why economic growth is important? See, economic growth is the one which fuels the overall sort of power of the nation, right? So that is what you have to keep in mind. Next is the large and growing population. We all know that India is the most populous country with more than 1.4 billion people, right? So this demography is supposed to sort of enhance the overall power of India, right, in different domains. Then the strategic location. See, please understand, and I have even told this earlier, that as of now, the most important geopolitical construct in the world is the Indo-Pacific. And in this Indo-Pacific, the Indian Ocean region is the most important. And in this Indian Ocean, we have India, which is the most important country. So naturally, India becomes the most important geographical entity when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, right? So always remember that. Next is democratic credentials. India is the largest democracy, and we recently witnessed sort of general elections, right? In which the maximum, the most number of people on the planet in a single country, they participated in the elections, right? So what we see is that India can act as a model for other countries when it comes to these democratic traditions, when it comes to peaceful sort of transition of powers, right? Next is India's balancing act. See, please understand that India has, in the historical, if we go into the historical construct, what we see is that India adopted the policy of non-alignment with respect to any of the power blocks. And slowly what we saw was the transition of this policy to a sort of strategic autonomy. What does this strategic autonomy principle means? That we have come into partnerships with different countries on the basis of our own national interest, right? So just remember that. And that is the reason that India is able to have its diplomatic maneuvering. India can maneuver diplomatically and have relations with sort of countries who are at war with each other or who are having antagonistic relations. Next is countering China's rise. Please understand that India, in association with other countries, for example, the United States of America or Japan, India has been sort of actively engaging in different platforms so as to contain the aggressive rise of China. See, India is not a country which wants to stop China for its economic growth. No. But when it comes to the aggressiveness of China, we definitely partner with other countries so as to stop that aggressiveness, because that is not good for any country. Next is promoting multilateralism. India has been at the forefront when it comes to promoting sort of international cooperation. Take the case of International Solar Alliance. Take the case of Paris Agreement. So what we see is that India has been collaborating effectively and sort of enthusiastically with different countries. Now, what are the challenges when it comes to India's role in the multipolar world? First is internal issues. Please understand that there are several socio-economic issues in India. For example, we have got entrenched poverty. We have got very bad levels of employment rates. That is, we have got huge unemployment in India. There is a sort of deficit when it comes to the skill, right? So on the other hand, we have got some of the very crucial issues when it comes to the internal security. For example, we have got the insurgency in the northeast. For example, we have got the terrorism in the Jammu Kashmir. For example, we have got the left-wing extremism in the central and the eastern part of the country. Now, these are some of the very critical issues, and this is what hampers the overall development of India, right? Next is balancing act complexity. We understand that we have got strategic autonomy and we are free to have relations with any country we want. But sometimes, and in the recent past, what we have witnessed is that India has been facing difficulties. Take the case of the US sanctions on the Iranian oil supplies to India, right? So India has good relations with Iran. And obviously, India has good relations with US, but US and Iran, they are sort of they're having antagonistic relations with each other, right? So what we see is sometimes this proves to be sort of not very good for India, right? So here, what India requires is a diplomatic maneuvering, a diplomatic sort of skills which are required to manage these relations. Next is military modernization. As I said, that India has its own socio-economic obligations. For example, India has to invest a lot of money when it comes to health, education, other things, right? So it is unable to spend effectively when it comes to, let's say, the military. So that military can be the top notch. Its military can be in line with what the other developed countries have, right? Now, as we see that this multipolar world order, it is presenting both opportunities as well as challenges. Now, what should be the way forward? Now, see, we can analyze this way forward at two fronts. First is for the world. What the world should be doing collectively. Strengthening multilateral institutions. The most important way forward is that there is a need to strengthen these multilateral institutions. By strengthening, I mean to say that there is also a need to restructure them, to make adequate changes in the structure and functioning of these bodies. Take the case of United Nations Security Council, right? So UNSC has to be reformed. Take the case of other bodies, right? So that it can reflect the current power dynamics, right? Next is investing in preventive diplomacy. What we witness is that there are several countries who are at war with each other or who are at the stage of war. So there is a need for preventive diplomacy. That is, there's a need for effective conflict resolution mechanism before the war starts. Let's say if we had already good structures in place when it comes to Israel-Palestine. So we understand that Israel-Palestine is not a new issue. It has been for years, going on for years. But there can be, for example, you have got issues in other parts of the country. So there needs to be a preventive diplomacy, right? Next is promoting peaceful conflict resolution. What we need to understand is, as India always says, that only dialogue and negotiation is the way forward. And India has said this when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. India has repeatedly said that only dialogue and negotiation is the way forward. Next is addressing the global challenges collectively. We all know that, climate change is affecting all the countries, irrespective of the political boundaries. So what we need to have is collaborative mechanisms. We need to have effective mechanisms so that we can evolve a particular strategy. We can collaborate on these issues, for example, climate change or pandemic, or let's say migration, on these issues. What should be the way forward for India? First is leveraging strategic partnerships. We all know that India has strategic partnerships with different countries. So what we need to do is we need to strengthen these partnerships. Let's say the partnerships we have with the US, the partnership we have with Russia, we need to strengthen them. And the base of these partnerships, the guiding light for India should always be the national interest. Right? The national interest has to be the supreme. Next is focusing on economic growth and development. As I said in the beginning, economic growth. If a country has good economic growth, it can transition into other powers as well. For example, military power, right? So India needs to invest heavily when it comes to the education, when it comes to the skill development, when it comes to the other aspects, right? So a proper investment in the socio-economic domain is required. Next is promoting multilateralism. As I said, India has been always in favor of promoting multilateralism. However, it needs a more boost. And what we need to do is we need to have more platforms where countries can come together, where India can actually lead the way, where India can show the light to different countries when it comes to different domains. For example, take the case of climate change or take the case of sort of having regional conflicts, right? Developing military capabilities. See, India needs to adequately invest when it comes to the military so as to deter any potential threat. Now we all know that there are sort of very serious threats when it comes to the China or Pakistan. So India needs to invest adequately when it comes to the military capabilities, at the same time making sure that it enhances the overall regional security. Please understand, India says itself to be a net security provider when it comes to the Indian Ocean region, right? So it needs to invest adequately when it comes to the military domain. Then we have got investing in the soft power. The world knows that India's soft power is unmatchable, right? Our language, cuisine, food, dance, culture, right? So what we need to do is that we need to sort of strengthen this. And moreover, we have got the Indian diaspora, right? So these are the cultural ambassadors of India, right? So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the world sort of realizes what the soft power of India is, right? So what we see is that in this tumultuous or in the conflict-ridden sort of multipolar world order, India can show a light to different countries and ensure that India charts a sort of a progress path where it not only secures its own economic development and prosperity, but it also contributes to the overall development of the world, making sure that there is peace and stability in the region. Now, the next article is with respect to the critical minerals. So recently, the government has launched the fourth tranche when it comes to the critical minerals auction. So we'll see what critical minerals are, what is their importance, and what can be the way forward for India. Now, this is with respect to GS3, mobilization of resources and science and technology. Now, see, when we talk about the definition of critical minerals, there is no particular definition, right? And different countries, they classify different minerals as critical minerals according to their own criteria, right? So they have their own criteria in place, and accordingly they describe that this particular mineral is a critical mineral when it comes to that particular country. Now, these minerals, they can be either metallic or they can be either non-metallic. They have two essential characteristics. Now, there are two very important characteristics when it comes to these critical minerals. The first is their essentiality. That is, they are very essential when it comes to the functioning of the technological domain, right? So in the technological arena, these critical elements are required. And in order to have a proper technological development, which is obviously essential for the overall economic development, there is the need for these critical minerals. So we have got the economic importance. Second is the supply chain risks. Please understand that these critical minerals are found in very few specific locations around the world, in very few countries, and that too on very specific locations. Now, this makes them prone to supply chain disruptions, right? So what we see is that there are supply chain risks involved when it comes to these critical minerals. So two essential characteristics are the essentiality when it comes to the technological domain. The second is the supply chain risks. Now, this criticality, or the importance, we can say, this criticality of minerals, it changes with time. That is according to the needs of the society, according to the technological evolution. So let's say you have got a particular mineral which has become important when it comes to a particular technology. So that might become critical for that particular country, right? So it evolves with time according to the needs of the society and according to the technological evolution. Now, what can be the examples of critical minerals? It can be antimony, it can be beryllium, bismuth, cobalt, copper, gallium, germanium, lithium, vanadium, right? So these are some of the examples of critical minerals. Now, what is the application of the critical minerals? The first is that it is used to manufacture advanced technologies. We have got smartphones. We have got sort of semiconductors, we have got computers, we have got robotics, we have got different sort of high performance computers, right? So all these, we have got solar panels, we have got other things as well. So all these require sort of critical minerals. Even the smallest of these things, smallest of the electronic gadget you have, it would be having some amount of critical minerals. It can be sort of platinum, it can be anything, it can be palladium, it can be anything, but it would contain some amount of critical minerals. Next is, it is used in low emission technologies. We have got the electric vehicles. We have got the solar panels. We have got the wind turbines. So these are being increasingly used. A good amount of critical minerals are used in these low emission technologies. Then we have got, it is also crucial for some common products. Let's take the case of stainless steel. It contains a bit of chromium, right? So it is also used in some of the common products. It is also used in sort of normal electronic products. Now, the top producers when it comes to the critical minerals are Chile, Indonesia, Congo, China, Australia, and South Africa when it comes to these critical minerals. Now, if you see the global production, regionally, that is on the basis of in different countries, how much of these critical minerals are being produced, or what is the share of a particular critical mineral when it comes to a particular country, you can look at this diagram. So what you see is at this picture. So what we see is that, look at the image and see the Canada. So Canada is producing almost 55%, or it has sort of reserves of cesium, right? It has almost 32% of potash. Then let's talk about the United States of America. So it has got 65% of the resources when it comes to beryllium. It has got 55% of the resources when it comes to helium. Then let's talk about Chile. It has almost 55% when it comes to rhenium, right? Then talk about Brazil. It has almost 88% of niobium, right? Now just see, there's also sort of application of this. So for example, cesium is used in medical imaging. For example, potash is being used in fertilizers. Beryllium is used in industrial components. Then helium is being used in cryogenics. Then the rhenium is used in turbine engine. Then we have got niobium, which is used in steel alloys. Let's talk about South Africa. So we have got South Africa. So platinum, almost 71% of the total reserves in the world. Then we have got chromium, 39%. Then we have got manganese, 29%. Steel, used in steel alloys, used in catalytic converters, right? Next, we have got Democratic Republic of Congo, right? So cobalt, almost 70% of the total reserves is in Democratic Republic of Congo for the cobalt. Then you have got tantalum, which is used in capacitor, almost 40%. Then we have got lithium, that is in Australia, almost 54%. Then we have got zirconium, almost 38%. Now let's talk about Spain. It has got substantial 41% when it comes to strontium, that is used in ceramic magnets. Then let's talk about Russia. So Russia has almost 40% of the total reserves when it comes to palladium, right? Then let's talk about China. Look at the number and the amount of the rare earth elements or the critical minerals which China has. It has abundant critical minerals, and we look into this is one of the most strategic concerns which India also faces, and in fact the whole world faces. Look at gallium, almost 96%, tungsten 83%, bismuth 73%, germanium 65%, antimony 63%, graphite 62%. Now the reason I am stressing on these percentages is because you will soon come to know very soon why I am stressing on these percentages. Next is rare earth metal, that is used in magnets, 62%, tellurium 62%, fluorspar 57%, vanadium 54%, molybdenum 45%, indium 39%, barnite 30%, and tin 27%, right? So this is what the global sort of distribution of critical minerals is all about, right? Now what is the status of critical minerals when it comes to India? So we have got the Ministry of Mines, which has identified a list of 30 critical minerals. Now what has been the basis? See, the basis has been, first, let's say, the disruptive potential of these critical minerals. Let's say the basis is substitutability, right? Whether we can substitute it or not. Next is we have got import reliance, right? Next is the usage across different sectors. So these are some of the parameters on the basis of which the Ministry of Mines has sort of come with a list which says that it has 30 critical minerals. Now some of them, if you want, we can just talk about it. It's antimony, beryllium, bismuth, cobalt, copper, gallium, germanium, lithium, right? So just remember some of these critical minerals. Now what is the significance of these critical minerals for India? First is economic development. As I've just told you, that these critical minerals form the essential part when it comes to the technological domain. World is witnessing Industrial Revolution 4.0. India is also investing significant amount of money when it comes to highly intensive technological domain. For example, we recently witnessed the sort of inauguration of the semiconductor plant in Gujarat, right? So what we see is that even for the critical sectors, for example, we have got defense, aerospace, or let's say we have got the electronic manufacturing. Even for these sectors, India requires these critical minerals, and thus it can enhance its overall economic development. Next is national security. See, we have got India is slowly building its own defense indigenous establishments. So India is focusing on strengthening its defense production systems, right? Let's say the aerospace, let's say we have got the semiconductors or the satellite telecommunication, right? So all these form a part of the national security, right? So it becomes important that India secures critical supplies, essential supplies of these critical minerals. Next is environmental sustainability. India has already adopted the target of being the net zero in 2070, right? So India has a target of net zero by 2070. So what it means is that India has to invest adequately when it comes to renewable technologies, when it comes to, let's say, solar panels, when it comes to wind turbines, when it comes to the batteries, when it comes to the storage, right? Or when it comes to, let's say, the electric vehicles. So electric vehicles, they require a lot of critical minerals, right? So that's the reason that for the environment sustainability also, there is a dire need of critical minerals. Now, what are the concerns when it comes to the critical minerals in India? First is limited domestic reserves. India has very less domestic reserves of critical minerals, and it is almost sort of 100% dependent on other countries when it comes to these critical minerals. So there is a lot of import dependence when it comes to the critical minerals. Look at this chart. So you can see that for lithium, India is almost 100% dependent on these countries, right? For cobalt, almost 100%. For nickel, almost 100%. Then see, for vanadium, niobium, germanium, for rhenium, beryllium, tantalum, and for strontium, almost 100%. Then let's see zirconium, almost 80%. Then we have got graphite, 60%, manganese, 50%. So this is what the import dependence of India is when it comes to the critical minerals, right? Then we have got increasing demand for these minerals. It is but obvious that as India would have its economic progress, it would witness technological development. It would witness sort of transitioning to a more greener sort of development trajectory or greener path. So it would naturally involve more sort of technological intensive industries and more demand, right? So, on the other hand, we'll also witness a greener transition, right? So we'll have more sort of renewable energy demand, and for that, what we would need is the critical minerals. Next is the challenges posed by China. As I just showed you in this image, that China has one of the largest reserves when it comes to these critical minerals or the rare earth elements, right? So it is something which is a strategic challenge, not only to India, but to the world, right? So if we want to transition to a sort of a growth trajectory which involves technologically intensive domains, so we need to make sure that almost all countries, they should diversify, and they should make sure that they have adequate amount of critical minerals for their own development, right? The other challenge is that China has almost completely monopolized the processing also, right? The processing of these critical minerals. Moreover, it has strategic partnerships with different countries. It has been investing billions of dollars when it comes to Chile, when it comes to Australia, or when it comes to Indonesia, so that it can sort of have the procurement of these critical minerals from these countries, right? Next is lack of processing and manufacturing. Please understand, we already have very less critical minerals, but at the same time, we don't even have the processing capacities for those sort of critical minerals which we have, right? So India has a dearth of processing facilities. We are not investing adequately when it comes to technologically sort of sound techniques of exploiting these critical minerals. Now, what are the steps required? What are the steps required when it comes to this critical minerals? The first is a proper assessment of the availability and accessibility of these critical minerals. That is, India needs to have a proper evaluation of its domestic reserves. India needs to have sustainable technologies for the exploitation of these, whatever the critical minerals India has. India needs to exploit them sustainably. Next is India needs to invest significantly when it comes to the infrastructure development for these critical minerals, when it comes to the research and development when it comes to these critical minerals, and it has to have a good policy measures. One step can be that it should go with different partnerships when it comes to different countries having critical minerals. So one step in the right direction has been India's partnership with Australia when it comes to sort of mining the lithium reserves. Next is setting up a specialized body. So there needs to be a setting up of specialized body. For example, we have got CSIRO in Australia. Now, this is the sort of most important research and development organization when it comes to sort of having research and development with respect to the critical minerals in Australia. So that can also be done in India. A first step can be that India can establish a center of excellence in the Ministry of Mines, which deals only with the critical minerals, right? Later it can be expanded. So what we see is that definitely these critical minerals are very, very important, especially considering that India is on a trajectory that it is witnessing a sort of a technological revolution in different domains, let's say artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics. On the other hand, India is also witnessing sort of increased investments when it comes to the renewables, which obviously requires critical minerals. So we need to have proper strategies in place. Now, before we go to the next topic, just this is a question from 2023. Right. So I want you guys to answer this question. The question says about 3/4. Now that is the reason I stressed upon the amount of these different critical minerals in different countries around the world. About 3/4 of the world's cobalt, a metal required for the manufacture of batteries for electric motor vehicles, is produced by A. Argentina, B. Botswana, C. the Democratic Republic of Congo, and D. Kazakhstan. Let me see who answers first in the comment section. Now, the next article is about the Panchayat extension to scheduled areas. So, a new article has been featured in The Hindu, which talks about that how this act has fostered forest conservation in India. And it also talks about that how this act has led to greater democratic decentralization when it comes to the governance, grassroots governance. Now, this is a part of GS2, decentralization, social sector, and GS3, environment conservation. Now, see, what is this Panchayat extension to scheduled areas 1996? See, historically, different tribal communities in India, they have been subjugated. And that has led to sort of the marginalization and their exclusion from the mainstream political and economic system, right? So that is what has caused sort of their distancing from the mainstream political and economic system. Now, they have faced numerous challenges. Right. For example, let's say the loss of land, for example, displacement, arbitrary displacement, loss of their livelihoods. So these are some of the very serious challenges which have been faced by these tribal communities. That is the reason that there was a long-standing demand from these sort of tribal communities that we need to have a sort of greater autonomy and control when it comes to our own resources, the land resources, the environment where they live, right? So it was on the basis of this notion that we had the PESA Act of 1996. Now the objective was to enable tribal self-rule in the 5th schedule areas. Now please understand that we have got Article 244. Subclause 1. Now this talks about the 5th schedule areas. Now the 5th schedule areas talk about the administration and control of these scheduled areas and these scheduled tribes in any state except the four states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Mizoram. Right. So it is the 5th schedule areas which talk about the administration and control of these scheduled areas and these scheduled tribes in any state except these 4 states, that is Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. Now, what is the source of inspiration when it comes to this PESA Act? Right. So the source of inspiration has been the 73rd and 74th Amendment. Now we all know that through these amendments, we had the institution of the local self-governance in India, right? That is the institution of grassroots democracy, right? So that is the source of inspiration for the same act. Now this empowers it gives special powers to the Gram Sabhas. That is the foundation. These are the foundation sort of platforms where community interacts and then reaches to a particular conclusion. They have these deliberations. Now, Gram Sabha lies at the very foundation, at the very heart of these local self institutions. Now, what are the significant provisions when it comes to the PESA Act? See, as I said, the institution of Gram Sabha, so that it can sort of be an effective platform, an effective forum where these communities can come together, have proper discussions and chart the progress they want to have and chart the developmental path they want to have. Next is the village level institutions. So this act tries to institutionalize village level institutions. For example, we have got the Panchayat Samiti or the village Panchayat or the Gram Sabha, so that they can use these institutions for effective governance. Next is powers and functions. This act endows the sort of these tribal groups with adequate powers and functions so that they can effectively manage their resources, they can conserve their environment and ultimately secure their livelihoods. Next is consultation. if there needs to be any project in these scheduled areas, there needs to be adequate participation of these Gram Sabha, and there is the mandatory requirement of the consultation mechanism. Next is that adequate funding has also been proposed to these Gram Sabhas and Panchayat Samitis so that they can have their own developmental projects. They can effectively make sure that proper developmental projects are being carried out in different domains. For example, let's say water, sanitation, or let's say making rural household, whatever, right? Then we have got land. This act also makes sure that the land rights of the tribals are protected. It makes sure that whenever you have got a land acquisition which takes place in this area, the consultation and the consent of the tribals is mandatory, right? Next is cultural and social practices. It makes sure, the act makes sure that the cultural and social practices, the customs and traditions of these tribal communities, they are protected. So that is what you need to keep in mind. Now, what are the outcomes of the PESA Act? First, it has led to the empowerment of tribal communities. Tribal communities, how this empowerment has come? See, please understand. Once you endow these tribal communities to manage their own resources, to have their own governance framework, you are not actually having a top-down approach. You are giving them the powers so that they can manage their own resources effectively. So that is what it leads to, the empowerment of tribal communities. Next is that it has led to the protection of land rights. One of the most important, or one of the most exploitative practices what we have seen is the sort of land alienation when it comes to these tribal groups. So it makes sure that these tribal communities have their own land rights and they can manage their own land resources, right? And if there is a sort of land acquisition which needs to take place, it requires a proper consent from the Gram Sabha. Next is preservation of culture and social practices. It has led to sort of the preservation of the local practices of these tribal communities, so that we don't have people from the outside community who are telling them, who are guiding them to follow any particular practice, right? Next is the promotion of decentralization. That is what even the objective of the directive principles of state policy is, that we need to decentralize and we need to devolve as much as power. And this goes with the Gandhian idea that we need to devolve as much as power so that we can have proper decentralization at the grassroots level. Then it has led to improved access to basic services, basic amenities like water, basic amenities like roads, basic amenities like different houses, constructions of basic houses. So that is what the PESA has done. Now, what are the limitations when it comes to the PESA Act? First is limited coverage. See, it is only covering the scheduled areas. It is not covering the scheduled tribes in other areas. So that is what it is having a limited coverage. Next is lack of awareness. Even the people who are living in these scheduled areas, they are not aware about sort of the institutionalization of Gram Sabha, the powers and the authorities they have, or the consent mechanism which is sort of incorporated in the act. So they are not even aware about that. Next is the limited resources. You have made a law, fine, but you have not transferred adequate amount of resources. So that actually makes the conditions, it doesn't change the condition actually. So what we see is that there is limited resources when it comes to the infrastructure development, when it comes to providing basic amenities like education, health. Then we have got the problem with respect to the lack of trained professionals. So we don't have adequate professionals to manage the meetings of the Gram Sabha, to have proper registers, to have proper rosters, to make sure that the meetings are carried on effectively, the sort of discussions are carried on effectively, and ultimately we have got the manifestation or the reflection of these decisions in the developmental process. So next is the political interference. What we have seen is that especially when it comes to the regional politics at the state level, we have got the political interference in the functioning of these Gram Sabha, and that has led to a sort of a bad nexus when it comes to the political leadership and these exploitative middlemen, right? Then it is also in conflict with other laws. See, it is in conflict with Wildlife Protection Act. Right, so we are giving sort of powers to the tribal communities under the PESA Act, but it sometimes is in confrontation with the Wildlife Protection Act or the Forest Rights Act. So there is sort of incoherence when it comes to different acts. So what we need to do is, what we see is that PESA Act is really something which has improved. So the condition, as the article itself highlights, the sort of condition when it comes to the forest conservation or when it comes to the democratic decentralization. So our objective should be to strengthen such laws and make sure that these tribal communities, they chart their own developmental path. We should not sort of suppress these tribal communities with our own notion of development, right? So that is what we need to do. Now, here is a question from 2010 of prelims, and it is with respect to the PESA Act. Let me read it. The government enacted the Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act in 1996. Which of the following is not identified as its objective? To provide self-governance, to recognize traditional rights, to create autonomous regions in tribal areas, to free the tribal people from exploitation. Now, let me see who answers first in the comment section. So the next article is with respect to the Coffee Board of India. So the Coffee Board of India is organizing a virtual meeting of coffee farmers across the country. Now this becomes really important for us because UPSC has been in the habit of asking questions when it comes to these bodies. Now this is a part of GS2 statutory bodies and GS3 agriculture. Now let's first talk about coffee. Right. So the coffee is indigenous to Abyssinia Plateau, that is Ethiopia, right? Ethiopia. And it was in the 11th century that we saw that it was taken, the seeds were taken to Arabia, right? And it was in the 17th century that Baba Budangiri, he actually took the seeds from Arabia and he actually brought these seeds to India, where he planted these seeds in what we call as the Baba Budan Hills in Karnataka, right? So remember this. Now this coffee plant, it requires hot and humid climate. So the temperatures should be around from 15 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius, right? And it requires a heavy rainfall, right? That is from 150 centimeters to 250 centimeters. So do remember. And it does not tolerate frost or snowfall or high temperature. If that would be the case, then it would lead to the destruction of the berries, right? Or the degradation of the leaves. Now it is generally grown under the shady trees. So what we can see is that it requires a mild cold conditions. Then the dry weather is very good for the ripening of the berries. Next, it is grown on hill slopes. That is, the slope should be from 600 meters till 1600 meters, right? Next is it requires a well-drained soil with rich humus. Now, traditionally, it is grown in some of the few states. So we have got, you can look at the map and it says that we have got Karnataka. So these are the traditional areas. We have got Karnataka, traditional coffee growing areas. Then we have got Kerala and we have Tamil Nadu. Then we have got non-traditional areas where the coffee is being sort of increasingly, it's being planted. We have got Andhra Pradesh, we have got Telangana, we have got Odisha, we have got Tripura, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, right? So Karnataka, as you can see, it's the sort of largest producer of coffee in India. Now, primarily, we have got two varieties of coffee. One is Arabica and the other is Robusta. Now, Arabica is sort of mild. It is not that strong, but it is more aromatic. And that is the reason it has got higher market value. When it comes to Robusta, it is sort of more strong, and that is the reason it is used for making blends, right? So just remember, and we can see we have got Robusta and we've got Arabica. Now, talking about the Coffee Board of India, please understand that it's a statutory organization. That is, it is made under a law. It is made under the Section 4 of the Coffee Act of 1942. It is under the administrative purview of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. I'm again stressing on these things is because UPSC, as I said, there have been cases where UPSC has directly asked these questions that, let's say, it can frame a question saying that the Coffee Board of India is under which ministry's jurisdiction. So just remember that it is under the jurisdiction of Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The board comprises of 33 members, including the chairperson, and the office of the Coffee Board of India is in Bangalore. Remember. Now, the focus areas of the Coffee Board of India is to promote the research and development, to promote the extension services with respect to these farmers, to promote the development of the sort of the market infrastructure, promote the market intelligence, external and internal promotion for coffee. Make sure that India also exports. Now, as of 2024, India is the eighth largest producer of coffee in the world. The first is Brazil. Now, before we go to the next topic, let's have a question in front of you. So though coffee and tea both are cultivated on hill slopes, there is some difference between them regarding their cultivation. In this context, consider the following statement. Coffee plant requires a hot and humid climate of tropical areas, whereas tea can be cultivated in both tropical and subtropical areas. That is the first statement. Second is coffee is propagated by seeds, but tea is propagated by stem cuttings. Which of the following statements given above are correct? One only, two only, both one and two, Neither 1 and 2. So let's see who answers first. So the next article is with respect to a very important security agency, and that is the Intelligence Bureau. So the IB chief, along with the NHRC Secretary General, they have got an extension in their service. So that is the context. Now this is with respect to GS3 internal security. Now talking about the Intelligence Bureau, it is the premier sort of internal intelligence agency when it comes to India, right? So it deals with the internal intelligence. Can you just tell me the body or the institution which deals with the external intelligence? Post your answer in the comment section, right? Let me know which is that body which deals with the external intelligence. Now, it also executes the counterintelligence and counterterrorism tasks, right? So if it gets any information with respect to any terror activity which is being planned, so it can take a sort of a counter terror action against that particular activity. Now it is under the overall administrative jurisdiction of the Ministry of Home Affairs. Also it was the Himmat Singh Ji Task Committee in the 1951 which recommended that for gathering intelligence at the border areas, we should employ the Intelligence Bureau. So as of now, the intelligence gathering at the border areas is also done by the Intelligence Bureau. Now, the Intelligence Bureau, the working of the Intelligence Bureau, the discussions which take place, the tasks they do, it is highly confidential. And Intelligence Bureau remains exempted when it comes to the RTI Act under Section 24 of this particular Act, that is RTI Act. So no information can be given when it comes to the Intelligence Bureau, right? So always remember. Now it passes intelligence information to other Indian intelligence agencies. For example, you have got the intelligence agencies in different states or the state police forces. So whenever they seek an information or on suo motu basis, also Intelligence Bureau passes the information to these bodies. Now, this is responsible for granting basic safety clearances. Please understand that whenever you have got the appointment of judges in the Indian judiciary, or whenever you have got the appointment of the Indian diplomats abroad, Intelligence Bureau makes a proper study of their background. And only then, after you have got the clearance from the Intelligence Bureau, then they are appointed. So this is one of the very important functions of Intelligence Bureau. Now, it is also authorized to carry out wiretapping. That is, if it feels so that it is important to conduct the tapping of the phones, it can do so. It does not require any sort of permission. Next, employees from the law enforcement agencies. For example, we have got the Indian Police Service, we have got the Indian Revenue Service, or even the personnel from the military. They sort of work in the Intelligence Bureau. But please make sure that it is the very senior sort of Indian Police Service officer who is actually appointed as the director of the Intelligence Bureau. So that is what you need to know about the Intelligence Bureau. So coming to the prelim snippet section, we have got the first topic as the World Craft City. So Sri Lanka has been sort of declared as it has earned the title of the World Craft City from the World Craft Council. Now this is an international non-governmental organization and it is working on the recognition and the preservation of the traditional crafts. So please understand that we have got a lot of cities around the world which are sort of working in different crafts and cultural heritage, right? So it is the World Craft Council which recognizes them so that they can have a proper recognition and then they can connect with each other and then they can sort of enhance their productivity. Now every 4 years the presidency it changes. As of now the presidency is with the Kuwait. Now this is affiliated with the United Nations Education, Social and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, under consultative status. Now it aims to promote the fellowship among the craftsperson by offering them encouragement, help and advice. So what it does is that it can also sometimes provide the funding services, adequate funding, so that these handicraftsmen or these craftsperson, they can develop their own crafts and they can excel in that particular domain. Next, it fosters and assists cultural exchange through conferences, international visits, research study, lectures, workshops, exhibition. Now, it is also being said that it would be much easier for Srinagar to sort of have interactions with different cities in Iran, right? So there are almost more than 10 cities which are which have earned the title of World Craft City in Iran. Also in Central Asia, there are many cities. So this might help Srinagar so evolving itself or in coming as a great center of the crafts. Next is the BrahMos. So what we recently witnessed was that the Philippines has sort of talked about the strengthened India-Philippines relations as India has supplied BrahMos to Philippines. Now the BrahMos missile, it is an Indo-Russian joint venture and the range of the missile is 290 kilometers. Please understand that this BrahMos missile is in the stages of development, different stages of development. So the range of the missile, it keeps on increasing, right? Now it's the fastest cruise missile in the world with a top speed of around 3 Mach. That is, it is more than 3 times the speed of sound. Now, BrahMos is named for the rivers of Brahmaputra in India and Moskva in Russia. Now, it is a 2-stage missile. That is, the first stage is that of solid propellant, and the second stage is that of a liquid ramjet. Right, so just remember that it is a 2-stage cruise missile. Now, it is a multi-platform missile that it can be sort of launched from air, from sort of sea, from land, right? Then it is a multi-capability missile with pinpoint accuracy and works both day and night irrespective of the weather conditions. Moreover, it operates on a fire and forget principle. That is, it can after you launch it, you need not to guide the missile. It can autonomously guide itself, the chart of the missile, that is the way it follows, and there is no external guidance which is needed. Now, Vietnam, United Arab Emirates and Indonesia are among the other potential customers of BrahMos missile. You can have a look at this pictorial representation also. Now, talking about the Kerala, the word Kerala. So the Kerala Assembly has unanimously passed a resolution urging the centre to rename the state as Kerala in the constitution. So please understand that the word Kerala, it is a Malayalam word. It's a Malayalam word, and the word English is an English version of this word Kerala, right? So the state government is actually, and the assembly has already passed a resolution urging the centre that under the Article 3. So Article 3 deals with, we have got Article 3, which deals with the formation of new states and the alteration of the names of the boundaries of the states in India, right? So we have got the mention of this word Kerala under the earliest mention can be actually seen in the Emperor Ashoka's rock edicts, which dates back to 257 BC. Now, the demand for a united Malayalam speaking state, it first gathered momentum in 1920s, and at that time you had this the princely states of Travancore and Cochin and the sort of Madras, the Malabar part of the Madras presidency, right? So the state of Kerala was finally created after the State Reorganization Commission. So please study all about this also, the States Reorganization Commission recommendation creating states on linguistic basis on November 1 and 1956. So what we see is that there have been sort of demands, especially, and we also saw that there have been demand by West Bengal also to change the name. So right now we have got the demand from the Kerala to change the name to Keralam, right? So just remember that. Now, next article, and this is basically a mapping. Now, this is because that recently there's a region in Russia and we call it Dagestan, right? So we have witnessed a sort of Islamist attack in Dagestan, and that is the reason it becomes important for us to have a good understanding of where this place is all about and the adjoining places. So if you just look at this map, we have got the map with respect to Russia, right? So you have a particular province, we have got Dagestan here. Now, it joins the Caspian Sea. So just remember where Dagestan is. Now, if you go into the close sort of description of this particular map, you can see that Caspian Sea, just see, we have got Caspian Sea here. Now, Caspian Sea is surrounded by some of the very important countries. We have got Kazakhstan, remember, we've got Turkmenistan, we have got Iran, we have got Azerbaijan, and then we have got Russia. So here we have got Dagestan. So remember, we have got few of the countries which border the Caspian Sea. The first is Kazakhstan, the second is Turkmenistan, the next is Iran, then we have got Azerbaijan, then we have got this Russia, and there is Dagestan, right? So just remember that. Next, you can also have a look at the Black Sea, right? So we have got here Black Sea. So the countries, Black Sea. See, this is very important for your prelims. Believe me, UPSC has asked questions directly. Which are the countries which border this particular sea? So just have a look. So we have got Russia, which borders Black Sea. Then we have got Turkey, we have got Georgia, we have got Bulgaria, we have got Romania. So just remember that. And then we have got on the north side, the Ukraine, right? So these are the countries which border the Black Sea. Now, one important part is that we have got the country of Azerbaijan, and in this country we had a very sort of a big conflict, a very serious conflict. Now, this conflict was in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, right? So this area was actually dominated by ethnic Armenians. So Armenia is this country. So this was dominated by ethnic Armenians, and it lies in Azerbaijan. So that's the reason I am telling you that this this particular region is known as Nagorno-Karabakh region. I think you all must be familiar with this particular region. So have a good look at this map, because it might prove to be very important for your prelims exam. That's all for today. I hope you like the session. Thank you.